Hey everyone, welcome on into Toronto Sports Rush for Bet Rivers. This is our live post-game show for the Toronto Maple Leafs losing in a shootout, their first shootout loss of the year, their first shootout of the year. A lot of firsts happened to them, Pierre McGuire, who is joining me here tonight, because they had also had a perfect record when they were up in two periods going into the third period. This one was a bit of a mess, you could say, for the Leafs in a way, but I want to have your expert analysis. We see them go up and then it doesn't stay that way. Sharks come out on top in overtime win. Excuse me, why do I keep saying overtime? It's because I've never said shootout. Okay. Pierre, what do you think of the game?
First of all, you know what? I'm looking at it like the glass was half full, Julie, not half empty. The fact they were able to put points in the bank again tonight is really important. Just getting 1 point was good. Would it have been better for them to win? Absolutely, especially in the shootout. That being said, I looked at the second period, and you and I talked this morning. And one of the things I said is I want to see them better defensively as a team, from the red line back to their icing line. In the second period, they held the San Jose Sharks a period of the long change to 3 shots on goal. That speaks to some of the improvement. Now, they haven't had any practice. They played yesterday. They won against Pittsburgh 6-5. But I'm encouraged because I'm seeing things happen from the coaching staff where they're trying to make things better. So you're not going to be perfect every night. This was far from being a Rembrandt. I think you would agree. There was a lot of different potholes all over the road here in this game tonight. That being said, they got a point out of it.
You sound like you work for the Toronto Maple Leafs at this point, Pierre, after that. But I do believe you do have some very good points in there. One of them being that they did get a point in a game that felt sort of like it had been shoehorned in when they'd come off of that long road trip and they're going to be heading out west to play a very difficult opponent in the Vegas Golden Knights during the trade deadline. Just a lot going on. And I wrote down your points from this morning because I prepared for this show, even though you wouldn't think about that because I was having such a difficult time understanding the idea of them being in a shootout. But you'd said you wanted them to hold their opponents to 30 shots or less or fewer, more layered structure in their own zone, better, tighter zone coverage, better and slicker zone exits. How would you evaluate how they did on those points?
I think most of them were really good till the third period. I didn't like the tying goal from Toffoli. I thought that the coverage was weak. You had a line that really hasn't been together a lot with Connor Dewar on the ice, Carly Jonkrook on the ice, and obviously David Kampf. So that's not a line that you see very often, Julie. In fact, you haven't seen it at all probably. And just Jonkrook was a step slow. And that's normal because there's rust on him still. He hasn't played in forever. That's about the only breakdown I saw. I'm like, darn it, I wish he would have been a little bit better. But I saw a lot of good stuff. Now, I also think, and you said this morning, and I think you're spot on, and you weren't disrespecting San Jose. You said this is a trap game. And you were right on. It was a trap game. And that's not disrespecting the San Jose Sharks at all. The truth of the matter is Toronto had won 5 straight games on the road. Or 5 straight games, 4 straight on the road. They're coming home and they're playing against a team that's one of the worst teams in the league. Let's be fair. They are.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
well, they didn't.
Yeah, they didn't look like it at points. I mean, there's some weird parts of this game where, okay, so you mentioned the third period. That's where they're able to score 2 goals to even the tally. Now, when you look at overtime, the Leafs had a power play to start that off. So they have a 4-on-3. Why could they not figure out a way to end this one in overtime to start when it just felt like if you have a power play in overtime, you should probably win.
No, you're right. You probably should. I think they were pedestrian. I think they were predictable. I think they were slow. I don't think they moved their feet. I don't think they moved the puck. I think they made bad shot selections. I give credit to San Jose. They had really good stick position, body position. They deflected a lot of pucks away. I thought Georgiev probably played one of his better games of the year. He was really good. He made some tremendous saves. When it looked like Toronto had a chance to really extend the lead, he was there to make some saves. So, again, I give credit where credit's due. They stepped up at the right time, San Jose. The fact they were able to win in a shootout against a far more skilled team. Toronto's far more skilled than San Jose. The fact San Jose was able to win, give them a lot of credit. Give them a lot of credit.
Yeah, that would be a big victory for them and a number of those guys that are from the Toronto area. As we say, the Toronto Maple Leafs always have a target on their back because so many kids are from kids. Well, they are kids. They're so young from Ontario that end up playing, and they get to play some of their first games back in Toronto, and it's an exciting time for them. But I'm curious when you look at the Leafs and just the stretch they've been on. We'd said this, so heading into this game, they'd won 7 out of 8 games. Now they've lost this one, but they got a point. But something about them just doesn't necessarily feel right. Like if you looked at just the scores, and of course they've allowed the goal differential would be something that would probably stand out. But the idea that like I kind of want to use the Mr. Rogers gif where it's like he has the clown face on and he takes it off. Like, are they, what is it when you pull back the scores and the stats and where they are in the league and you actually look at like the nuts and bolts of this team, like where they are right now, how would you describe where they are right now and how they're playing, the good and the bad?
Well, first of all, I think the bad is they look fatigued. They look tired as a group.
Yes.
I think there's a lot of mental and physical stuff that's gone into this last road trip. Quick turnaround. They played in Pittsburgh yesterday, come home, play today, and they leave tomorrow for Vegas. Time zone travel galore. So, look, they before the break, they were out west. People forget they were in Edmonton, they were in Calgary, they were in Seattle, they were in Vancouver. They come home. Then you've got three of your best players playing in a Four Nations event where the hockey's never been faster. So I think everybody just looks tired. They look fatigued. That's normal. That's okay. I think this trip will help energize them going to Vegas, going to Utah, going to Colorado. I think they'll get some reinvigoration. I do. Going on the road for this team will be good. But the truth is, the positive, they're being prepared to play playoff hockey.
Mm.
They're playing a grinding style. They're trying to keep the shot totals low. They're trying to keep the score totals low. They're trying to insulate their goalie without taking penalties. And they've been doing this without Chris Tanev. When Tanev comes back, it changes the whole construction in the back end too. I'm way more encouraged than most people. I have been throughout most of the year. Stolarz is a good goaltender. Wall's a good goaltender. They got depth in goal, very positive in terms of the cap. They can make some moves. I think by the end of the trade deadline, they'll probably be a bit of a different team. I'm encouraged by this group.
Right, and Stolarz, as you mentioned, I mean, he made that incredible save in the shootout. That I'm curious, like it was on Will
Will
Smith.
Smith. Yeah, Will Smith. Yeah.
Like that, what do you think about that type of shot in the shootout where you're really, really waiting the goalie out and you're trying to sneak it between the skate and the pad? It's kind of like in soccer, we call it like a panenka, where they're just like you wait until basically the goalie makes their decision and then you score. Like it just doesn't, it feels a little, in my mind, I don't know, a little off.
Yeah, not as predictable for sure. I like the way Nylander approaches it. Comes with a high rate of speed, makes a play, puts a puck on goal. I like hard plays on net, not soft plays. But every guy's different. And I wasn't good enough as a player to be in a shootout. So it doesn't matter anyway. What I think wouldn't matter anyways.
Well, I had to take a penalty shot once, and I wanted to die. I was just so nervous. I shot it right into the goalie's pads. I was just like, "Get this off my stick, please, somebody!" But I was more so thinking about the shot of just like outwaiting the goalie that long. Like that just felt like too long in my mind.
That's probably a play that Will Smith could do last year when he was at Boston College or even playing in World Junior for Team USA. That's not a shot that's going to work very often in the NHL.
Right. And there was an incredible save by the other pad of Anthony Stolarz. You got to watch it. It was pretty impressive. He did look a little bit fatigued as well, even though Wall played in the game before. But a lot of them, as you mentioned, especially in the defensive zone coverage, tired. A lot of the guys very gassed. But how do you how do you deal with that if that's just like part of your schedule when you're just like, well, we're really tired and you, but that's just a thing that you have to deal with. So how do you deal with it?
Mental strength, prepared, run four-line game. Don't extend your shifts. Don't take penalties. Don't put a lot of duress on the guys that have to kill penalties. Be physical when you have to, but don't be overly physical. You got to be smart about the hits you give out and the hits that you take. There's ways of managing. The most veteran teams understand those concepts, and young players need to learn from veteran players. I will never forget Brian Trottier coming to our team in Pittsburgh and how much he taught our guys about how to manage minutes, how to manage key times in games, how to get through, 4 games in 7 nights, all this stuff. It was amazing to watch. Time zone travel, behavior on the road, all these different things. Brian was such a great leader, taught a lot of guys a lot of things about being in the league.
Right. And you just mentioned sort of the idea of this when you do have the mental fatigue and the physical fatigue, that's so much about playoffs. And if you are going to go all the way, you are going to have all of those things and more when you're dealing with playoff hockey. And you mentioned this player earlier on with the Leafs, and as someone who would be a great addition kind of in the playoffs, as a guy who can really grind it out both offensively and defensively. And that's Matthew Nyes, who we've seen just be a massive addition to this team. He scored a goal tonight in the last minute of the game. Last 5 seconds it was tonight, and it was the last millisecond or whatever, 10th of a second the other night. But just his work, even taking away the goalie's eyes. What stands out to you most about him that's really impressive?
His strength. He's just so fast. He's so strong at the point of attack. He can outmuscle most people with board play, slot area play. He's got a strong, for a young player, he's got an amazingly strong stick. It's hard to knock him off the puck. He understands how to play with star players. Playing with Matthews and Marner, everybody thinks might be that easy. Those guys are intimidating to play with. And young guys aren't always very comfortable playing with those types of players. He seems really comfortable. And I think part of that was playing at the University of Minnesota with a guy named Logan Cooley, who's a pretty good player as well.
Mhm.
But no, this is a really talented kid. I will never forget, Julie, all the pundits, and I spent a lot of time watching him play in Minnesota. I was hearing and listening and reading all the pundits. He's going to have to go play for the Marlies. He's not ready to do that. He's not ready. And I'm like, it's great that you guys have these opinions, because I think everybody should have an opinion in hockey. I never saw one of you at the University of Minnesota. I never saw one of you at a Big Ten game. How could you make those comments about a player when you've never even been to a game that he plays in? And that's where I think we've got a lot of problems when it comes to evaluation on young players. We got lots of people that form opinions
Mm.
based on what they read on the internet, not actually what they're seeing with their own eyes. And I think that's a bit of a problem.
Right, and kind of jumping in at that, whether it's that AHL level where guys have completely different situations than maybe even how they were scouted or how they played throughout the majority of their entire life, and they're in a completely different situation at that point, which affects even just like what lines they're on. Or I was thinking about the fact that on a different team, the New York Rangers trading Ryan Lindgren to Colorado, and how Jared Bednar described in a way how someone asked him about his stats and them not being very good, right? Like you've
Yeah.
seen the clip, I'm
Oh
sure.
yeah, no, I've seen it. Yeah, I've already talked
Yeah,
about it on a couple other shows.
yeah, and I loved it how Bednar kind of described how in the way that their systems are, in the way they can utilize him, those numbers can be very different. Like that's just I'm not, I'm just kind of like AI summarizing that at that point. But I found that interesting in a way of just a guy isn't the same in every single situation. Now, when you look at this game, if you're the Leafs, if you're Craig Berube, what do you take away from it for your game in Vegas?
So I like what we did in the second period, especially the period of long change. Like the fact that we showed some compete. I don't like the fact that we gave up a 2-goal lead, so we'll work on that. I know my players are fatigued, so I'm not going to browbeat them and beat them up. We don't have any practice time because you're flying tomorrow, time change, got to play on Wednesday. So I'm taking more pot. Like I said, glass half full rather than half empty. Let's load up and get after them. This is a big measuring stick game for, I think, Toronto against Vegas. They have to be considered one of the favorites in the Western Conference. I don't know about Vegas. So I think all the good top players are going to want to measure up. You look at Austin Matthews, he's going to say, hey, I think I'm better than Jack Eichel, but you got to go prove it.
Hmm.
And I'm sure Mitchell Marner's saying, I can dance on any one of their defensemen, so I'm going to go prove it. And I'm sure the guys in Vegas are saying, I'm just as good as that guy.
Hmm.
So, yeah, no, it's going to be a good test. I think it's a great way to start a mini 3-game road trip. I really do. I think to play a top team like Vegas, I think it's great.
Right, and they're always a team to be reckoned with. Just like they're getting going, kind of. They know how to prepare for the playoffs. But then also you have this week of the trade deadline. So, like, so your players are tired. So they might not be performing up to the level that they're supposed to be. So then, if you're Brad Treliving and Craig Brewery, we discussed the partnership, but the whole organization, you're Brad Treliving. How do you evaluate maybe some of the players you have when you are dealing with these conditions and you are likely going to be making some kind of change this week? We'll say.
I think it's mostly internally important to identify who are the guys you need to win with and who are the guys you can afford to trade away because you've got other depth in the organization. I have to believe if Toronto's making deals and they trade an established player, it's probably someone they think they have internally that they can replace him with, or the player they're getting back they think may be a better fit for them. So that's where it's going to come down to. The most important thing when you're making a trade, know both sides of it. You know, everybody set. I'll give you an example: the Seth Jones trade. Chicago's happy they got Spencer Knight. I get it. I've seen Spencer Knight play since he's been 11 years old. He played for the Mid Fairfield Rangers. Really talented goalie from Darien, Connecticut. Amazing athlete. I get it. I get why they did it. And they got a first round pick too, Chicago. But the guy that's running the Florida Panthers, Billy Zito, he was the assistant GM in Columbus when Seth Jones played there. So he knows Seth Jones far better than Chicago does, and he knows Spencer Knight because he was a GM that was there when Spencer Knight was drafted. So they know both players in Florida far better than what Chicago knows. And
Right.
so you look at that deal and you say those are the kinds of things that help teams when you know both sides of the trade.
That's great intel to look at and see the relationship of how long and how well different management or coaches know a player, because
Mhm.
there might be something that you might have missed, right? Like if you don't know a player as well, but you think from what your sample size is, you're like, then maybe they're meh, but like then you see them being really wanted by another team that knows them. You're like, wait a second, right? It's like anything. You always want what someone else wants at the same time. So you kind of want to see that.
Yeah.
But you've been, we've looked at the positives of this, and there are lots. The Leafs, still have just it's a good time in in Leafland. But what's maybe like two or three things or even players, like what would you pinpoint as like this has to improve?
So I'll give you an example. The score's 2-2 in the game. Max Domi hasn't had a great year offensively, but he's an important player for the team. He is because he can play a lot of different ways. He gets a breakaway, doesn't score. Okay, I understand. Would you like to see him score? Yeah, because then they don't go to overtime. They don't go to a shootout and they win the game. So little things like that, just finite details of guys having to understand. We talked about the Toffoli goal. Charlie Yarncrow can't lose position there through the neutral zone. That's his guy. So that's just it's just fine tuning now. This is the big news flash for Leaf fans, and I'm sure a lot of them are very angry. You're tied for first place and you have a game in hand. So it's not like you're where Buffalo is, and it's not like where your San Jose is or Chicago is, or a lot of other teams. You're in pretty good shape right now. The
I
most the
think
most
that
the most important thing, Julie, I got to tell you, stay out of that 2-3 matchup. Stay out of the
oh
2-3 match. Just stay out of that.
yeah,
Stay out of that.
that's a tough one. But what about the fact that the Rangers are now tied in points with
I think,
Detroit for that
yeah,
second
that's
wild
amazing.
card spot?
That's first of all, give Peter Laviolette and his staff, Michael Pekka and Phil Halsey, give those guys a lot of credit. Danny Muse, the other assistant coach, give those guys a lot of credit. They could have mailed it in. I watched them play in Pittsburgh, not this past Sunday, the Sunday before. They had 15 shots on goal and they won the game. And I'll tell you right now, it was because of Shesterkin and the leadership of JT Miller. So getting JT Miller's helped that team out a ton. And that's not a knock on Filipino, but it's helped that entire Ranger team a ton. That was a
Oh,
really good acquisition. Really, really
completely
good
different
acquisition.
players too. Yeah,
Yeah.
just and their personalities in the room, and then but that's such an interesting place to be as a team where you're like, oh, are we good? Are we bad? Are we good enough to try to make a run? But then if you, as we've seen, remember we saw LA Kings when they got into when they're in that 8th spot, they won the cup in 2014. It's like if you're on that roll right at the end and you're able to get in, you could be a team like if the Leafs were to face the Rangers in the first round, let's just say. I don't think people in Toronto would like that matchup because you'd be with a Rangers team that has been through a lot and who'd probably be pretty scrappy. And the Leafs would be maybe a little bit more, I don't know, oh my gosh, we can't lose to them kind of thing. There's a whole lot of different ways you
Well, I'll
can
tell
look
you the
at
one thing that would happen early in that series, Ryan Reeves would earn a paycheck
it. Yes.
because he would have to straighten up Rempe pretty quick.
Oh gosh. Or he'd lose a paycheck. I'm not sure. It depends on how it
Don't
goes
get paid in
down.
the playoffs, but I'm just saying that's why you have a player like that.
Yeah.
My good friend and former boss Brian Burke used to say it all the time. You got to have a nuclear deterrent, and
Right.
Ryan Reeves is that nuclear deterrent.
And that's what Team Canada didn't have, which was so well known. I mean, Sam Bennett's a great guy, but he's not anywhere near Brady Tkachuk.
And then how about tonight? Tommy Wilson fights Brady Tkachuk down in Washington. It's a
Yes.
pretty good fight, and then Brady at the end kind of lifts him over. Washington eventually wins the game, but Ottawa came down. They were down 3-0. They came back and tied that thing. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I think that was a fight I think everyone had wanted to see between Canada and USA and Tom Wilson been on the team, but two
Yeah.
big boys fighting in both teams that, especially Washington, where they are, and then Ottawa sort of, trying to be able to be one of those big teams as well. But just before we wrap things up, you mentioned the idea with Max Domi, and he misses misses scoring on the breakaway. And it just made me think about the shootout and the fact that this was their first shootout of the season. You don't have any practice time really at this point, as you mentioned, at least for the time being. So then in what way do you address the shootout when it is something that was the difference maker, at least at the end in the game tonight? Or do you just let it be?
I wouldn't really talk about it much tonight. What I would do though is, and I know they do it. Most teams do it. Seen enough practices, run enough practices. They'll practice their shootouts. And when you get into, I don't think they were counting on going to a shootout tonight.
No.
But I think as we go along now, they'll get intel and they'll start breaking other teams' goalies down and break down situations and talk about it a little bit. But you don't want to overdo it with, again, it's a long season. I know people think every game's a Super Bowl. In hockey, that's not how it works. It's too hard. The most important thing is don't be an A player one night and a D plus player the next night. Be a solid B plus every game and make your whole team be a solid B plus every game. And if you are, you're going to win a whack of games.
There's a couple D-men that need you to say that to them, I think. I'm not going to single out anyone's
I'm not saying anything about their D-men. I think there's some guys, we talked about some mistakes that happen in the game. They need Tanev back. Tanev will make a big difference. And I've said this for a while. They need a third. I think everybody's been saying it. They need a third line center. And if they could ever get an elite puck moving defenseman, Julie, buckle up. You're going to be busy for a long time this spring.
Yeah, well, one can only hope. We'll have to see what Brad Treliving and the Toronto Maple Leafs end up cooking up this week, as we're highly anticipating maybe an interesting trade deadline, maybe not. A lot of people saying this could potentially not be an interesting trade deadline overall, but we think for the Leafs, they will do something in terms of bolstering either that third center position and, as Pierre just mentioned, that puck moving defenseman, if they're able to acquire such strengths at this point in the season. But thank you guys for watching, and thank you, Pierre, for all of your insight and analysis as always. And I'll figure out how to open the show without stumbling all over myself by being so surprised that the Toronto Maple Leafs were in a shootout and that they lost in a shootout and that they also snapped their win streak. So they'll look to get back on track against Vegas on Wednesday. Thank you guys so much for watching Toronto Sports Rush for Bet Rivers. We'll see you next time.